In September of 1941, a message landed on the desk of the American cryptanalysts tasked with breaking and translating Japanese code. These men faced such an overwhelming backlog of intercepted communications that it took nearly a month before this specific message was decrypted. However, when opened, the message was clear enough. The Japanese wanted a detailed map of Pearl Harbor created to identify the most effective places to drop bombs. Unfortunately, this was a message the commander at Pearl Harbor would never receive. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, the chief of naval war plans, personally forbade the information to be passed along, dismissing the message out of hand. He believed it would only be distracting. That wasn't the only warning the Americans ignored. In November, Dutch cryptanalysts repeatedly warned Washington of an imminent Japanese attack in the Pacific. On December 6, 1941, the British quietly warned Colonel Bonifellas, the American observer in Cairo, that there would be an attack on the US in 24 hours. Fellas did not even forward this information. These are all true stories surrounding Pearl Harbor, moments where the American government could have put two and two together to actually defend against a Japanese attack. In our timeline, these failures were the result of incompetence, poor communication, and bureaucratic inertia. But what if the withheld information had been deliberate? What if President Franklin Delano Roosevelt not only knew about the attack, but chose to let it happen to push the US into World War II? Roosevelt reads the decrypted message about mapping out Pearl Harbor, and other intelligence points to an impending attack by Japan. He is able to determine the attack will take place in early December. FDR decides the time has come for a gamble. Roosevelt knows that the American public is deeply against entering another world war. They remember World War I too well, and isolationism is only more popular as families grapple with the possibility they might have to send their sons away to fight. If Roosevelt wants US support in favor of the war, he will need a dramatic event to seize on, to convince people it is time. He believes that an attack on Pearl Harbor would do nicely. He reaches out to his closest advisor, Harry Hopkins, and confesses his secret plans. Together, they craft a strategy to ensure that the attack on Pearl Harbor will push the American public to war, while ensuring as little damage to American equipment and lives as possible. FDR is also trying to keep it a secret for as long as possible that his decoders have figured out how to read JN-25, the Japanese naval code. He knows it's a valuable advantage. He quietly sets Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner on ensuring that there is no one at Pearl Harbor working on Japanese code. He doesn't want any accidental discovery of the attack. He issues vague messages to Admiral Husband E. Kimmel and General Walter C. Short at the end of November, warning them to be on their guard at all times. When General Short writes back, claiming he is only worried about an internal revolt, Harry Hopkins writes back forcefully, telling him to put aside that nonsense and to be prepared. Short, chagrined, told his men to be alert and began to act like an attack was a real possibility. He initiated an Alert 2, which had planes fueled and armed at all times. Due to orders from FDR, every US aircraft carrier leaves on missions far from Pearl Harbor. Fuel depots, repair facilities, and dry docks are quietly fortified, in the hopes that they will survive bombing. When Pearl Harbor is attacked on December the 7th, over 350 Japanese aircraft descend on the installation. Short and Kimmel are surprised, but ready, due to the persistent messages from the White House. Within moments, 118 of the 125 planes at Pearl Harbor are off the ground, fighting with the Japanese. This allows the majority of the American fleet to escape. Ultimately, the harbor is still bombed, but there are very few casualties, and the Pacific Fleet is almost entirely intact. Only the USS Arizona and Oklahoma are lost. Naval intelligence is also able to conceal the fact that they have broken the Japanese code. The American public is outraged. FDR delivers his Day of Infamy speech. Congress overwhelmingly votes to declare war on Japan, bringing the United States into World War II. Isolationists all across the country joined the war effort, galled by the Japanese attack on American soil. They may not have wanted to enter the war originally, but they will not stand by now that their country has been attacked. As the Pacific Fleet is largely intact, it races to try to help the Philippines. However, the American fleet does not yet understand that naval warfare has changed forever. Many of the US battleships are sunk by planes flying out from Japanese aircraft carriers. A classic fleet has no answer to such a threat, and thousands upon thousands of Americans die in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The American public is horrified. These defeats forced the Navy to fundamentally re-evaluate its strategy. Over the next few months, the importance of aircraft carriers becomes evident. Under the leadership of Admiral Chester Nimitz, the Navy wins its first major battle of the Pacific Theater, the Battle of the Tasman Sea. This battle is notable in military history, in that the American and Japanese fleets both fought using planes flying from their carriers. While the fighting is intensifying, many back home are beginning to question, how did so few die in the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor? Why were all the important ships out at sea? How did the Americans get prepared quite so quickly? Investigative journalist Ernie Pyle begins digging into the rumors, interviewing several military officers. The true breakthrough comes when he finds himself talking to one of Harry Hopkins' many doctors. Hopkins was terribly sick from stomach cancer. 75% of his stomach had been removed in 1939. The doctor quietly reveals that one night Hopkins was raving about having the Pearl Harbor deaths and this bloody war on his conscience. Pyle publishes a series of recrimination articles that suggest that key warnings surrounding the attack on Pearl Harbor had either been deliberately suppressed or extremely incompetently handled. Public trust in FDR begins to waver. Amid the uproar, Americans begin persistently calling for an independent investigation. Eventually, Congress feels that they must act, and an investigation into Roosevelt is promised. In 1942, a congressional committee begins investigating the events leading up to Pearl Harbor, placing figures such as Admiral Turner on the stand. Testimony from codebreakers, surprised their messages were never passed along, and intelligence officials told not to distract the leaders at Pearl Harbor paint a thoroughly damning picture. There is more than enough evidence to prove that FDR knew about the attack in advance and took deliberate steps to ensure its success, to ensure the US would join the war. Protests in favor of Roosevelt stepping down sweep the nation. Roosevelt initially resists, but after a march of hundreds of thousands calling for his removal from the White House in January 1943, Roosevelt accepts that he must go. With a heavy heart, he abdicates, for the good of the war effort, and Henry A. Wallace, his young vice president, takes over. A staunch progressive, Wallace pushes for legislation for race equality and establishes a race relations board to ensure equality between all races in America. Legislation that has the blood of Republicans boiling. Wallace trusts Stalin implicitly, and the two great powers begin to work together quite closely on plans for the next stage of the European war front. This close relationship discomforts Churchill and leads to a cooling of US-British relations. At the Tehran Conference, Wallace easily agrees to Stalin's demand for control over Eastern Europe, earning Churchill's unending wrath. Wallace is unperturbed, happy to stay out of Russia's backyard, if they stay out of South America. Wallace even tells Stalin he can maintain power in the parts of Poland he had freed, much to Churchill's chagrin. Wallace rushes home from Tehran after hearing that Roosevelt had died of a stroke. The stress of the public outcry over his handling of Pearl Harbor had taken a toll on his already fragile health. Though many Americans felt betrayed that he had withheld knowledge on the Pearl Harbor attack, he had still guided the nation through the Great Depression. His funeral is a massive event, and Wallace himself gives the eulogy, praising Roosevelt for always trying to help his country even amidst the controversy. The war ends in August 1945, after the dropping of an atomic bomb on Niigata. Emperor Hirohito surrenders almost immediately afterwards. After peace is established, Wallace quickly discovers that his popularity was tied directly to the war. His more progressive policies, especially his comment to racial equality, alienates a lot of voters, particularly in the South. He is swept out of office in 1948 to a Republican landslide and the presidency of Thomas Dewey. A significantly more aggressive leader, he will cause the breakout of the Cold War almost immediately, fighting for American influence in countries around the globe. However, that's a story for another day. It is interesting to consider how history might have been different if FDR had knowingly allowed Pearl Harbor to enter the war. Would he have been justified in such a gamble if he was trying to secure America's smooth entry into World War II as early as possible? Or would such a choice have betrayed the American populace? The Navy might have been better prepared. The public might have been less interested in war. Stalin could have taken advantage. It's impossible to say exactly what might have changed. Thanks for watching. What scenarios would you like to hear in the future? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more revisionist history.